Organizational learning is the process of creating, retaining, and transferring knowledge within an organization. An organization improves over time as it gains experience. From this experience, it is able to create knowledge. This knowledge is broad, covering any topic that could better an organization. Examples may include ways to increase production efficiency or to develop beneficial investor relations. Knowledge is created at 4 different units: individual, group, organizational, and interorganizational. An organization learns successfully when it is able to retain this knowledge and transfer it to, or spread it throughout, the various divisions within an organization. Organizational learning can be measured in different ways, however one common measurement used is the learning curve. Relevance: organizational learning happens frequently within an organization and allows the organization to stay competitive in an ever-changing environment. It is a process of improvement that can increase efficiency, accuracy, or profits, to name a few examples. Organizational learning is an aspect of organizations and a subfield of organizational studies. As an aspect of an organization, organizational learning is the process of creating, retaining, and transferring knowledge. Knowledge creation, knowledge retention, and knowledge transfer can be seen as adaptive processes that are functions of experience. Experience is the knowledge that contributes to the procedural understanding of a subject through involvement or exposure. Research within organizational learning specifically applies to the attributes and behavior of this knowledge and how it can produce changes in the cognition, routines, and behaviors of an organization and its individuals. Individuals are predominantly seen as the functional mechanisms for organizational learning by creating knowledge through experience. However, individuals' knowledge only facilitates learning within the organization as a whole if it is transferred. Individuals may withhold their knowledge or exit the organization. Knowledge that is embedded into the organization, in addition to its individuals, can be retained. Methods to embed knowledge extend beyond retaining individuals to using knowledge repositories such as communication tools, processes, routines, networks, and transactive memory systems. As a subfield, organizational learning is the study of experience, knowledge, and the effects of knowledge within an organizational context. The study of organizational learning directly contributes to the applied science of knowledge management and the concept of the learning organization. Organizational learning is related to the studies of organizational theory, organizational communication, organizational behavior, organizational psychology, and organizational development. Organizational learning has received contributions from the fields of educational psychology, sociology, economics, anthropology, political science, and management science. Units of learning Organizational learning is one of the 4 organizational units of learning: individual, team, organizational, and interorganizational. Organizational learning involves the process through which organizational units change as a result of experience. An example of organizational learning is a hospital surgical team learning to use new technology that will increase efficiency. Individual learning is the smallest unit at which learning can occur. An individual learns new skills or ideas, and his productivity at work may increase as he gains expertise. The individual can decide whether or not to share his knowledge with the rest of the group. If the individual leaves the group and does not unregistered trademark share his knowledge before leaving, the group loses this knowledge. In their study of software development, Bow, Slaughter and Espinosa found that individuals were more productive the more specialized experience they had with a certain system. Group learning is the next largest unit at which learning can occur. Group learning happens when individuals within a group acquire, share, and combine knowledge through experience with one another. There are conflicting definitions of group learning among researchers studying it. One belief is that group learning is a process in which a group takes action, gets feedback, and uses this feedback to modify their future action. Another belief is that group learning happens when a member shares his or her individual knowledge with other group members. Once this happens, individual learning turns into group learning. Reagan's argot and Brooks studied group learning by examining joint replacement surgery in teaching hospitals. They concluded that a OE increased experience working together in a team promoted better coordination and teamwork. Working together in a team also allowed members to share their knowledge with others and learn from other members. Organizational learning is the way in which an organization creates and organizes knowledge relating to their functions and culture. Organizational learning happens in all of the organization unregistered trademark S activities, and it happens in different speeds. The goal of organizational learning is to successfully adapt to changing environments, to adjust under uncertain conditions, and to increase efficiency. According to Argot, managers in manufacturing plants saw organization learning occur when they found ways to make individual workers more proficient, improve the organization unregistered trademark SA technology, tooling, and layout, improve the organization unregistered trademark S structure, and determine the organization unregistered trademark S strengths. Interorganizational learning is the way in which different organizations in an alliance collaborate, share knowledge, and learn from one another. An organization is able to improve their OE processes and products by integrating new insights and knowledge from another organization. By learning from another organization, an organization is able to cut time costs, decrease the risks associated with problem solving, and learn faster. Learning from another organization can mean either applying the same ideas used by that organization or modifying these ideas, thereby creating innovation. Interorganizational learning occurs frequently in fixed business models, such as franchising. The franchisee looking to use the franchisor unregistered trademark S brand has to learn how to use the organization unregistered trademark S business model before starting a franchise. History of study the origin of the focused study of organizational learning can be traced to the late 1970s, when researchers studied it from a psychological viewpoint. Key advances in the field include behavioral psychology and organizational development. In their 1978 work on organizational learning, Chris Argery and Donald Shah paragraph N developed the concepts of single-loop and double-loop learning. Single-loop learning is the process in which a mistake is corrected by using a different strategy or method that is expected to yield a different, successful outcome. Take, for example, a person who acts a certain way to accomplish a certain goal. If this persona unregistered trademark S actions fail in accomplishing his goal, with single-loop learning, this person will reflect on his previous actions and, going forward, he will take a different set of actions to accomplish the same goal. Double-loop learning, on the other hand, is a more complicated process in which a mistake is corrected by rethinking the initial goal. In the previous example, the person would show double-loop learning if he chose to re-evaluate his goal and beliefs instead of simply reassessing his failed actions. He will then take a set of actions that are aligned with his re-evaluated goals and beliefs. Argery and Shin explain that both single-loop and double-loop learning processes are present in organizations and are two types of organizational learning. Single-loop learning occurs when an organization detects a mistake, corrects it, and carries on with its present policies and objectives. Double-loop learning occurs when an organization detects a mistake and changes its policies and objectives before it can take corrective actions. Adaptation and routines. In their book Defining the Behavioral Theory of the Firm, Richard Seart and James G. March described organizational learning as an organization unregistered trademark S adaptive behavior over time. This consists of the adaptation of goals, adaptation in attention rules, and adaptation in search rules. Part of organizational learning is setting goals and changing these goals over time. They change along with an organization unregistered trademark S members are established as problems arise. When setting goals, an organization should consider three variables: whether organization unregistered trademark S past goal, the organization unregistered trademark S past performance, and the past performance of other comparably unregistered trademark organizations adapting an organization unregistered trademark attention rules consists of determining which parts of an organization unregistered trademark environment requires most attention. Tacit and March give the example of the criteria an organization uses to evaluate employees' unregistered trademark performances. Over time, organizations learned which criteria to use for their evaluations and how much weight to assign to each criteria. They also use the example of selecting which criteria to use when comparing only a unregistered trademark organization with a similar one. An organization unregistered trademark adaptation in search rules refers to its ability to find solutions for its problems. Since a solution depends on the problem, an organization unregistered trademark search rules will change accordingly. Typically, an organization will be more likely to search for a solution a certain way if this search method previously succeeded in finding a solution. An organization unregistered trademark search rules will depend on its previous successes or failures with the alternative search rules. Learning Curves by Dutton and Thomas. John M. Dutton and Annie Thomas organized field studies on various industries to study the rates of learning in organizations. They found that workers unregistered trademark errors or costs decrease as they learn from experience. However, since the knowledge that workers unregistered trademark learn lessons over time, they cannot improve their performance at a constant rate. Instead, the rate by which they improve decreases with more experience. Dutton and Thomas also found that there are 4 causal categories that affect a firm unregistered trademark's progress. 2 categories, exogenous and endogenous learning, describe the source of a firm unregistered trademark's progress. Exogenous learning occurs when a firm acquires information from external sources that allow it to progress. Examples of external sources include OE suppliers, customers, competitors, and government. Endogenous learning occurs when employees learn from within the firm, which is OE manifested by technical changes, direct labor learning, and smoothing production flows. The other 2 categories, induced and autonomous learning, describe the environments in which progress occurs. Induced learning occurs when a firm makes investments or adds resources to an environment to make it conducive for learning. Autonomous learning occurs when sustained production leads to automatic improvements over long periods of time. Knowledge. Knowledge is an indicator of organizational learning. Organization learning happens when there is a change in the knowledge of an organization. Researchers measured knowledge in various ways. For example, some researchers assess knowledge as changes in an organization unregistered trademark practices or routines that increase efficiency. Other researchers base it on the number of patents an organization has. Knowledge management is the process of collecting, developing, and spreading knowledge assets to enable organizational learning. Nature of knowledge equals. Knowledge is not simply a homogeneous resource. Although it is related to data and information, knowledge is identical to neither. Data is a set of defined, objective facts concerning events, while information is a value-added form of data that adds meaning through contextualization, categorization, calculation, correction, or condensation. Knowledge is the applied version of information, an aqueous combination of information within a container of experience, framing, value, contextualization, and insight. Experience is knowledge that is generated through exposure to and application of knowledge. Knowledge originates within and is applied by units of an organization to evaluate and utilize experience and information effectively. Knowledge can become embedded within repositories, routines, processes, practices, and norms, depending on the relationship between information, experience, and knowledge. 2 distinct forms of knowledge, tacit and implicit, are significant in this respect. Explicit knowledge is codified, systematic, formal, and easy to communicate. Tacit knowledge is personal, context-specific, subjective knowledge. Explicit knowledge is knowledge that is easy to transfer. Unlike tacit knowledge, explicit knowledge is declarative or factual. It is transferred through written, verbal, or codified media. Examples of this include instructions, definitions, and documents. Among its employees, Toyota spreads explicit knowledge about its assembly line production. Toyota requires each team of workers and each individual worker to document their tasks, providing detailed descriptions on how each task is to be performed, how long each task should take, the sequence of steps to be followed in performing each task, and the steps to be taken by each worker in checking his or her own work. This uses explicit knowledge since the knowledge is passed along using a code, which is a document of detailed descriptions in Toyota unregistered trademark's case. Tacit knowledge is knowledge that is difficult to transfer. As first described by Michael Poliner, tacit knowledge is the knowledge of procedures. It is a personal type of knowledge that cannot be shared simply through written or verbal communication. It is learned mostly through experience over time. For example, Toyota transfers tacit knowledge whenever it opens a new assembly factory. To train its new employees for a new factory, Toyota sends a group of its new employees to work at one of its established factories, where experienced employees train them. After this long-term training, they are sent back to the new factory to transfer their production knowledge to the rest of the new employees. This is a transfer of tacit knowledge since this knowledge is too complex to be codified and passed along through a document. This knowledge can only be transferred to new employees through practice and experience. Measuring learning organizational learning tracks the changes that occur within an organization as it acquires knowledge and experience. To evaluate organizational learning, the knowledge an organization creates, transfers, and retains must be quantified. Researchers studying organizational learning have measured the knowledge acquired through various ways since there is no one way of measuring it. Sylvia Radi measured knowledge as the change in practices within an organization over time, which is essentially learning from experience. In her study, she observed an organization acquire knowledge as its novices working at building sites learned about safety through experience and became practitioners. George Huber measured knowledge as the distribution of information within an organization. In his study, he noted that organizational components commonly develop new unregistered trademark information by piecing together items of information that they obtain from other organizational units. He gives the example of a shipping department that learns that a shortage problem exists by comparing information from the warehouse with information from the sales department. An increasingly common and versatile measure of organizational learning is an organizational learning curve demonstrating experience curve effects. A learning curve measures the rate of a metric of learning relative to a metric for experience. Researcher Linda Argot explains that large increases in productivity typically occur as organizations gain experience in production. However, Argot also notes that organizations' unregistered trademark rates of learning vary. Argot identifies three factors that affect these rates: increased proficiency of individuals, improvements in an organization unregistered trademark's technology, and improvements in its structure. Some organizations show great productivity gains while others show little or no gains, given the same amount of experience. The experience curves in Fig. 1 plot the decreasing unit cost versus the total cumulative units produced, a common way to measure the effect of experience. The linear input form on the left is transformed into the log-log form on the right to demonstrate that the proficiency increase correlates with experience. Context and learning an organization unregistered trademark's experience affects its learning, so it is important to also study the context of the organizational climate, which affects an organization unregistered trademark's experience. This context refers to an organization unregistered trademark's characteristics, specifically its structure, culture, technology, identity, memory, goals, incentives, and strategy. It also includes its environment, which consists of its competitors, clients, and regulators, to name a few parties. While this context establishes how knowledge is acquired by the organization, this knowledge modifies context as the organization adapts to it. The leader-initiated cultural context of learning has inspired key research into whether the organization has a learning or performance orientation, an environment of psychological safety, the group superordinate identity, and group dynamics. Research into these concepts like Edmund Zorn unregistered trademark study shows that an organization operating under a context promoting curiosity, information sharing, and psychological safety encourages organizational learning. Understanding of group learning dynamics is becoming an increased focus as group-based work becomes more common. Groups share, generate, evaluate, and combine knowledge as they work together. Processes. The findings of organizational learning research have identified the key processes that drive organizational learning, as well as its context and effects. These processes can be divided into 3 stages: knowledge creation, knowledge retention, and knowledge transfer. Knowledge creation knowledge creation specifically concerns experience that can be embedded within the organization. Experience is knowledge generated by direct exposure to the subject, and in the context of acquiring experience within organizations, this experience becomes specific knowledge applicable to the organization. That is, through tasks involving the needs, processes, and environment of the organization, explicit and tacit knowledge are reinforced and become contextualized by the aspects of the organization. While experience can produce outputs in data, information, or knowledge, experience in the form of knowledge is useful since this can be transferred, retained, and tacitly or explicitly utilized within organizational processes. Knowledge creation connects to creativity and its relationship to experience. Compared to knowledge transfer and knowledge retention, knowledge creation has not received much research attention. Dimensions of experience are aspects of experience that impact the form and function of knowledge creation. The organizational dimension refers to the directness or indirectness of experience acquired in addition to the configurations of individuals, units, and networks. The spatial dimension refers to the geographic concentration or dispersion of the experience. The temporal dimension refers to frequency and pace at which the experience is acquired or its temporal relation to a task. The content dimension refers to the subject task or unit, outcome, novelty, heterogeneity, and ambiguity. The artificiality dimension refers to the directness of the experience and the degree to which the experience is fabricated, adapted, or transcribed. Knowledge transfer knowledge transfer concerns the mechanisms by which experience spreads and embeds itself within the organization. Knowledge transfer can be evaluated using various metrics, including learning curves that demonstrate process improvements over time by comparing the decrease in labor hours to complete a unit of production with the cumulative units produced over time. Unregistered trademark identification of organizational learning curves preceded more complex outcome considerations that now inform measures of knowledge transfer. While knowledge may transfer tacitly and explicitly as direct experience, organizations can introduce processes and knowledge management systems that facilitate this transfer. Researchers investigate the context of various factors and mechanisms affecting knowledge transfer to determine their beneficial and detrimental effects. Factors on knowledge transfer include the dimensions of the knowledge described in the prior section, as well as the contexts in which it occurs and mechanisms through which it can occur. Relational context concerns whether knowledge is interconnected. Cognitive context concerns mental abilities and processes regarding knowledge. Motivational context of personal preferences and social influences affect direct or indirect knowledge transfer behaviors. Emotional context impacts mental state and sense of security, which affect knowledge transfer. Social networks determine the flows through which knowledge can transfer and the node-based conditional limitations on transfer. Personal movement between units and organizations impacts available knowledge and geographical, chronological, and social limitations on knowledge transfer. Routines impact knowledge transfer as they contain embedded knowledge and teach it through experience repeating the routine. Templates affect knowledge transfer as they affect the framing, priming, volume, and content parameters for formal exchanges of knowledge. Alliances impact knowledge transfer between formal and informal groups. Knowledge retention knowledge retention concerns the behavior of knowledge that has been embedded within the organization, characterized by the organizational memory. Organizational memory, quantified by measures such as cumulative knowledge and the rate of decay over time, is impacted by experience, processes and knowledge repositories that affect knowledge retention. Knowledge repositories are of key significance as they are intentional remedies to increase retention. Repositories can include the organization unregistered trademark S rules and routines, altered by the processes of routine development and routine modification. Transactive memory systems are additional methods by which knowledge holders within the organization can be identified and utilized, subject to their development and performance. Applications of organizational learning research and contexts for organizational learning facilitation and practices are numerous. Experience curves can be used to make projections of production costs, compare performance across units, identify the effects of various processes and practices, and make informed financial decisions about how to allocate resources. Utilizing knowledge transfer and retention concepts to recognize, maintain, and reclaim embedded knowledge can help organizations become more efficient with their knowledge. Organizational learning theories and knowledge management practices can be applied to organizational design and leadership decisions. Knowledge management practices. Various knowledge management concepts and practices are the relevant products of organizational learning research. Work on knowledge transfer applies to knowledge retention and contributes to many of the applications listed below, including the practices of building learning organizations, implementing knowledge management systems, and its context for interorganizational learning and the diffusion of innovations. Development of learning organizations Learning organizations are organizations that actively work to optimize learning. Learning organizations use the active process of knowledge management to design organizational processes and systems that concretely facilitate knowledge creation, transfer, and retention. The study of organizational learning and other fields of research such as organizational development, system theory, and cognitive science provide the theoretical basis for specifically prescribing these interventions. An example of an organizational process implemented to increase organizational learning is the U.S. Army's use of a formally structured debrief process called an after-action review to analyze what happened, why it happened, and how it could be improved immediately after a mission. The concept of the factory as a learning laboratory is also related. Learning organizations also address organizational climate by creating a supportive learning environment and practicing leadership that reinforces learning. Creating a supportive learning environment and reinforcing learning depends on the leadership of the organization and the culture it promotes. Leaders can create learning opportunities by facilitating environments that include learning activities, establishing a culture of learning via norms, behaviors, and rules, and led processes of discourse by listening, asking questions, and providing feedback. Leaders must practice the individual learning they advocate for by remaining open to new perspectives, being aware of personal biases, seeking exposure to unfiltered and contradictory sources of information, and developing a sense of humility. Knowledge management systems While learning processes depend on the context for optimizing knowledge transfer, the implementation of knowledge management systems incorporates technology into these processes. Knowledge management systems are technologies that serve as a repository, communication, or collaboration tool for transferring and retaining knowledge. Embedding knowledge in technology can prevent organizational forgetting and allow knowledge to transfer across barriers such as distance, organizational unit, and specialization. Knowledge management systems alone are not necessarily successful, but as a communication tool they tangibly reinforce individuals' ability to spread and reinforce their knowledge. Diffusion of innovation Organizational learning is important to consider in relation to innovation, entrepreneurship, technological change, and economic growth, specifically within the contexts of knowledge sharing and interorganizational learning. As one of the key dynamics behind the knowledge economy, Organizational learning informs our understanding of knowledge transfer between organizations. Heterogeneous experience yields better learning outcomes than homogeneous experience, and knowledge diffusion spreads heterogeneous experience across organizations. Diffusion of innovations theory explores how and why people adopt new ideas, practices and products. It may be seen as a subset of the anthropological concept of diffusion and can help to explain how ideas are spread by individuals, social networks, and organizations. Innovation policy, economic development initiatives, educational program endeavors, and entrepreneurial incubation and acceleration could all be informed by organizational learning practices. See also. References. Further reading, Amadon, Deborah M. Innovation Strategy for the Knowledge Economy. Butterworth Heinemann, Newton, M.A. p. 19, Argot, L. Organizational Learning, Creating, Retaining and Transferring Knowledge. Norwell, Massachusetts, Kluwer Academic Publishers. Argery, C., Overcoming Organizational Defenses, Facilitating Organizational Learning, Allen and Bacon, Boston. Bray, D. Literature Review, Knowledge Management Research at the Organizational Level, Social Science Research Network. Easterby Smith, M. and M. A. Lals, The Blackwell Handbook of Organizational Learning and Knowledge Management, Oxford, Blackwell Publishing. Garvin, D. A., Learning in Action, A Guide to Putting the Learning Organization to Work, Harvard Business School Press, Boston, M.A. May, Paul. The Business of E-Commerce. Cambridge University Press, New York. p. 7, Watson, Bruce. Rethinking Organizational Learning. Melbourne, Doctorate, Faculty of Education, Education, The University of Melbourne. External links, University of Colorado at Denver Organizational Learning page with links to articles, Wikibooks on learning theories and organizational learning.